Have you ever felt that pull? That undeniable urge for something more, something new, something just over the horizon. Imagine feeling that, but an entire nation feeling it all at once. That, my friends, was the spirit of 19th century America. It was a time of immense change, a young country buzzing with energy, and a vast uncharted continent beckoning from the west. This is the story of the great American westward expansion, not just as a historical event, but as a deeply human journey fueled by dreams, desperation, and an unshakable belief in destiny. Welcome to the first chapter, The Call of the West. To truly understand why millions of Americans packed up their lives and ventured into the unknown, we need to grasp a powerful, almost spiritual idea that gripped the nation: manifest destiny. It's a term you've probably heard, but what did it actually mean to the people of the time? It wasn't just a political slogan. It was a deeply felt conviction. Many Americans believed it was their divinely ordained right, their obvious destiny, to expand their democratic institutions across the entire continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Think about the world they lived in. The East Coast was becoming more crowded, established, and in some ways, rigid. For many, the social and economic ladders felt fixed. But out west? The West was a blank canvas. It represented a second chance, a place where your past didn't define you, and your future was limited only by your own grit and determination. This idea was incredibly powerful. It whispered to farmers struggling with exhausted soil, to city dwellers crammed into burgeoning towns, and to ambitious young people who saw no room for growth where they were. The West wasn't just land. It was the physical embodiment of the American dream. This concept of manifest destiny was visually captured in famous paintings of the era, like John Gast's American Progress. You see the figure of Columbia, a personification of the United States, floating westward. She strings telegraph wire with one hand and carries a schoolbook in the other, bringing light, knowledge, and civilization into the dark, untamed wilderness. Behind her follow the pioneers, the stagecoaches, the farmers, and the railroads. Ahead of her, wildlife and Native Americans retreat into the shadows. This single image powerfully conveys the sentiment of the time, that this expansion was not just inevitable, but that it was a force for good, a righteous and preordained path for the nation. It was progress, marching westward. Of course, this belief conveniently overlooked the fact that the West was not empty. It was home to hundreds of diverse Native American nations and had been for millennia. But in the minds of many expansionists, this was a detail to be managed, not a barrier to be respected. The narrative of manifest destiny painted the West as a wild, untamed land waiting to be tamed and made productive in the way they understood it, through farming, industry, and settlement. This clash of worldviews would become one of the most tragic and defining conflicts of the westward movement, a story we will explore in depth later on. For now, it's crucial to understand that for the pioneers, this belief wasn't born of malice, but of a fervent, almost religious sense of purpose. They believed they were building a better world. Now, let's get down to the practicalities. Why would a family risk everything: their home, their savings, their very lives, for a journey across thousands of miles of treacherous terrain? The answer, for many, was simple: land. The promise of fertile soil was an almost magnetic force. In the East, good farmland was scarce and expensive. Generations of farming had depleted the soil in many areas. But the West? The West was a land of mythic fertility. Letters and pamphlets circulated back east, describing the incredible bounty of places like Oregon and California. They spoke of soil so rich you could practically just scatter seeds and watch them grow, of river valleys with deep black earth perfect for crops. Imagine being a farmer in New England, wrestling with rocky, stubborn soil year after year. Then you hear a story, maybe from a neighbor's cousin who went west, about the Willamette Valley in Oregon, a place described as a modern-day Garden of Eden. The tales described acres upon acres of pristine land, available for next to nothing under government acts like the Homestead Act. All you had to do was get there and work it. This wasn't just about farming, it was about ownership. The dream of owning your own piece of America was profoundly powerful. Land meant stability. It meant you were your own boss. It meant you had something tangible to pass down to your children. For countless immigrants fleeing the rigid class structures of Europe, and for Americans stuck in low-wage jobs, land ownership was the ultimate symbol of freedom and success. The West offered this dream on an unimaginable scale. It was a lottery where the ticket was your courage and the prize was a future of your own making. Beyond the rich soil, there was the allure of wide-open spaces. The sheer scale of the American West is hard to comprehend even today. For people living in the increasingly crowded towns and cities of the East, the concept of endless horizons and untouched nature was intoxicating. It spoke to a deep-seated American ideal of individualism and self-reliance. Out on the prairie, a person could feel truly free, unbound by the constraints of society. It was a chance to breathe, to build something from scratch, to live a life on your own terms. This romantic vision of the West was a powerful motivator, especially for those who felt suffocated by their current circumstances. It was a chance to escape disease, which was rampant in crowded eastern cities. It was an opportunity to escape social and religious persecution. For groups like the Mormons, led by Brigham Young, the West was a sanctuary, a place where they could build their own society. A Zion in the desert, far from the hostility they had faced in the East. For them, the call of the West was a call for survival and religious freedom. And then, in 1848, a single discovery sent a shockwave across the nation and the world: gold. The California gold rush was the ultimate catalyst. The whispered rumors of fertile land were one thing, but the tangible promise of getting rich quick was something else entirely. Stories, often wildly exaggerated, spread like wildfire. Tales of men picking up gold nuggets the size of their fists from riverbeds. Newspapers printed sensational headlines and gold fever swept the country. Suddenly, the demographic of westward travelers changed. It wasn't just farm families looking for a new start anymore. It was single young men, often called 49ers, from every state and dozens of countries. They were merchants who abandoned their shops, sailors who jumped ship in San Francisco, doctors and lawyers who traded their professions for a pickaxe and a gold pan. They were all chasing the same glittering dream. These stories, the tales of bountiful land and easy riches, created a powerful feedback loop. The more people who went west, the more letters and stories flowed back east. A traveler's diary might be published. A prospector who struck it rich might return to his hometown, his pockets lined with gold, inspiring a dozen more to follow in his footsteps. These weren't official government reports. They were personal, electrifying accounts from people you knew, or people who knew people you knew. Word of mouth was the engine of the expansion. A letter from a sister in Oregon describing the mild winters and lush forests was far more convincing than any government brochure. A story told over a beer in a tavern about a friend who found a vein of silver in the Nevada mountains sparked imaginations in a way no advertisement could. These stories painted a picture of the West as a land of boundless opportunity, a place where ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. They built a mythology of the West, a collective dream that pulled people from their homes and set their faces toward the setting sun. This was the call. It was a symphony of voices, the politician's promise of manifest destiny, the farmer's dream of fertile soil, the miner's lust for gold, and the whisper of a friend's letter promising a better life. It was a powerful, irresistible force that would reshape the American continent and the American character forever. The decision to answer that call was the first step on a long and perilous road, a journey into the heart of the American experience. Thank you so much for joining me on this first part of our journey. The story of the westward expansion is vast and complex, and we've only just scratched the surface. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, where we'll look at the incredible, grueling realities of the overland trails. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. In our last chapter, we talked about the grand vision set in motion by Lewis and Clark, a vision of a nation stretching from sea to shining sea. But an idea, no matter how powerful, is just a starting point. It takes boots on the ground, courage in the heart, and an unshakable will to turn a dotted line on a map into a real, tangible path. Today, we read diving into the stories of the very first people who did just that, the trailblazers who carved the Oregon Trail out of the wilderness. After Lewis and Clark returned with their incredible tales of the West, the initial spark of interest was more about profit than settlement. The first wave of people to venture into these vast, uncharted territories weren't families in covered wagons. They were rugged, solitary figures driven by the lure of riches. I'm talking about the fur traders and the legendary mountain men. Think about it. The early 1800s were the golden age of the fur trade. Beaver hats were the height of fashion in Europe and the eastern United States, and the streams and rivers of the Rocky Mountains were teeming with them. Men like Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger, and Kit Carson became living legends. These weren't just trappers. They were explorers in their own right. They had to be. To survive, they needed an intimate knowledge of the land, where to find water, which mountain passes were crossable, and how to navigate the complex relationships with the Native American tribes whose ancestral lands they were traversing. Year after year, they pushed deeper into the West, following animal trails and ancient native pathways. They established trading posts, like Fort Laramie and Fort Hall, which were little more than rough-hewn stockades in a sea of prairie. These outposts became vital dots on the map, oases of supply and information for anyone brave enough to follow. The paths they blazed weren't a single clear road. They were a network of interconnecting trails, shortcuts, and detours, a living map etched into the landscape by their moccasined feet. They were the ones who truly discovered the South Pass in present-day Wyoming, a wide, gentle saddle in the Continental Divide. This discovery was monumental. It was the key that unlocked the West, proving that wagons could, in fact, cross the seemingly impassable Rocky Mountains. Without the relentless curiosity and survival instincts of these mountain men, the Oregon Trail as we know, it simply wouldn't exist. But commerce wasn't the only force pulling people westward. A different kind of calling began to echo from the wilderness, a spiritual one. As stories of the Native American tribes filtered back east, so too did a desire among religious groups to bring their faith to these new communities. This brings us to the next crucial group of trailblazers, the missionaries. They were driven by a conviction that was just as strong as the trappers' desire for fur. They saw the West not as a source of wealth, but as a field for harvest, a place to sow the seeds of their beliefs. And unlike the solitary mountain men, the missionaries often traveled with a different purpose: to build permanent communities. They weren't just passing through. They intended to stay. This required a different kind of journey, one that involved bringing more than just traps and a rifle. They needed supplies to build homes, schools, and churches. And for that, they needed wagons. This is where our story takes a pivotal turn, introducing two of the most significant figures in the trail's early history, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. In 1836, Marcus, a medical doctor and missionary, and his new wife Narcissa, a teacher, set out for the Oregon country. They weren't alone. They traveled with another missionary couple, Henry and Eliza Spalding. But what made their journey truly historic wasn't just their mission. It was how they traveled. The Whitmans and Spaldings were determined to prove that families, and more specifically, that white women could make the overland journey. At the time, this was a radical idea. The West was seen as a brutal, unforgiving realm exclusively for hardened men. The presence of women was thought to be an impossible liability. Narcissa Whitman and Eliza Spalding shattered that perception. They became the first Anglo-American women to cross the continent overland. Their journey was grueling. Marcus had to continually modify a sturdy farm wagon, lightening its load, disassembling it to float across rivers, and winching it over steep inclines. He was obsessed with getting a wheeled vehicle as far west as possible to prove it could be done. He eventually had to abandon the wagon bed, converting the rest into a two-wheeled cart, which he finally had to leave at Fort Boise. But he had made his point. He had taken a wheeled vehicle farther west than anyone thought possible. Narcissa, for her part, documented their travels in a series of letters and journals sent back home. Her writing was vivid and personal. She didn't just write about the geography. She wrote about the daily struggles and the small triumphs. She described the awe-inspiring beauty of the plains, the challenges of cooking over a buffalo chip fire, and the sheer exhaustion of traveling day after day. She wrote with an educated, relatable voice that resonated deeply with people back east, especially women. When they finally arrived in the Walla Walla Valley, they established the Whitman Mission, a beacon of American presence in a region jointly occupied by Britain and the United States. But the more lasting impact came from their letters. Back home, their accounts were published in newspapers and missionary circulars. Suddenly, the Oregon country didn't seem like such a mythical, dangerous place. Narcissa's words painted a picture of a fertile paradise, a new Eden waiting for hard-working Christian families. She wrote of land of the most mild and pleasant climate, and soil that could grow anything. For thousands of people back in the East who were facing economic hardship, overcrowding, and disease, her letters were more than just an interesting travelogue. They were a call to action. They were an invitation. The story of the Whitmans and Spaldings became a powerful piece of propaganda for westward expansion. Here was proof that it could be done. Here was proof that families could not only survive the journey, but could thrive at its end. The path, once trod only by rugged mountain men and daring missionaries, was now open in the popular imagination. The stories of their courage, particularly Narcissa's, transformed the idea of going to Oregon from a wild, reckless adventure into a feasible, divinely sanctioned quest for a better life. The trickle of individuals was about to become a flood. The groundwork had been laid, the path had been proven, and the inspiration had been ignited. The age of the lone trailblazer was ending, and the age of the pioneer family was about to begin. The Oregon Trail was ready for the Great Migration. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of our story. It's a powerful reminder that history is made by individuals whose courage and conviction paved the way for generations to follow. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next episode, where the first great wagon trains finally hit the trail. We'll see you then. Imagine this. It's the mid-1800s. Your world is small, familiar. Your farm, your town, the faces you've known your entire life. Then a whisper starts, a rumor that grows into a roartales of a land out west, a place of boundless opportunity, fertile soil, and a chance to build something truly your own. This wasn't just a simple move. It was a monumental gamble, a decision to risk everything you have for a dream you've only heard about in letters and tall tales. This is the story of how that journey began, not on the trail, but in the heart and home. The decision to go west was a seismic event for any family. It meant turning your back on generations of history, on the comfort of community, and on the only life you'd ever known. Imagine the conversations whispered late at night, weighing the grueling certainties of the journey against the shimmering promise of a better future. For many, staying put meant facing depleted soil, economic hardship, or a rigid social structure with no room to grow. The West, however distant and dangerous, represented freedom. It was a chance for a farmer to own land that was truly his, for a craftsman to start a new business, for a family to escape the past and write their own future. It was a decision fueled by a potent mix of desperation and audacious hope. Once the choice was made, a frantic period of preparation began. This wasn't like packing for a vacation. It was like outfitting an expedition to another planet. The family's entire existence had to be condensed into a single, sturdy vessel, the prairie schooner. These covered wagons, typically about 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, became their mobile homes, their fortresses, and their lifeboats on a sea of grass. They had to be tough, with strong wheels and a durable canvas cover treated with linseed oil to repel the relentless rain and sun. Choosing the right wagon was the first of many life or death decisions. Next came the engine of this new life, the draft animals. While horses might seem like the obvious choice for speed, seasoned travelers knew better. Oxen were the true champions of the trail. They were stronger, more resilient, and could survive on the sparse prairie grasses that would starve a horse. A team of 4 to 6 oxen was standard, their slow plodding pace setting the rhythm for the months to come. These animals weren't just livestock. They were teammates, their survival intrinsically linked to the family's own. Learning to drive them, to shout the right commands like gee and ha, was a critical new skill for farmers accustomed to plowing a familiar field. The wagon had to be loaded with painstaking precision. This was a masterclass in prioritization. Every single item had to justify its weight and space. The foundation of their supplies was food, enough to last for a 5 to 6 month journey. We're talking hundreds of pounds of flour, bacon, coffee, sugar, and salt. Cornmeal and dried beans were staples. It was a monotonous, high-energy diet designed for survival, not pleasure. Imagine packing 200 pounds of flour, knowing that your family's daily bread depended on keeping it dry through river crossings and thunderstorms. Beyond food, they packed the tools of civilization. An axe for chopping firewood and repairing the wagon, a shovel for digging out of mud, ropes, chains, and a box of tools were non-negotiable. A rifle and ammunition were essential, not just for hunting game like buffalo and antelope, but for protection in a land where the rule of law was thousands of miles away. Women packed their own essential kits, needles and thread for mending clothes torn by brush and bramble, and a basic medical kit. This kit was a humble arsenal against a host of dangers, containing things like laudanum for pain, castor oil, and bandages. The person in charge of this kit often became the unsung doctor of the wagon train. But what do you do with the life you're leaving behind? This was the most heartbreaking part of the preparation. Families had to sell their farms, the land their parents and grandparents may have worked. They sold livestock, furniture, and family heirlooms that couldn't make the journey. Each item sold felt like severing a tie to their past. Public auctions were common, where neighbors would gather to buy the possessions of the departing family. It was a somber, final act, turning a lifetime of accumulated belongings back into cash for the journey ahead. And then came the goodbyes. These farewells were unlike any we know today. There were no phone calls, no video chats, no promise of a holiday visit. When a family left for Oregon or California, their relatives and friends knew they would likely never see them again. These goodbyes were, for all intents and purposes, final. They were filled with tears, prayers, and the heavy weight of uncertainty. Siblings, parents, and lifelong friends clung to each other, etching faces into memory, knowing that letters, if they ever arrived, would be the only connection they had left. The emotional toll of this separation was immense, a silent burden carried alongside the sacks of flour and barrels of water. As spring approached, these prepared and heartbroken families began to converge on the jumping-off points. Towns like Independence, St. Joseph, and Council Bluffs swelled with a transient population of thousands of hopeful emigrants. These once quiet frontier towns transformed into chaotic, bustling hubs of commerce and anxiety. The streets were choked with wagons, the air filled with the braying of mules, the lowing of oxen, and a babble of languages and dialects from all over the country and even Europe. Blacksmiths worked day and night, their hammers ringing as they shoed oxen and repaired wagon wheels. Merchants did a booming business selling last-minute supplies, often at hugely inflated prices. It was here, in these chaotic gateway cities, that the journey truly began to feel real. Families who had traveled alone for hundreds of miles now saw the scale of the migration. They weren't alone in their dream. They began to form companies, electing captains, and drafting rules for the trail. Strangers became neighbors, and neighbors became allies in a shared epic undertaking. The atmosphere was a strange cocktail of excitement, fear, and last-minute panic. Have we packed enough? Is our wagon strong enough? Are we truly ready for what lies ahead? Standing there on the edge of the vast, unmapped wilderness, with their old lives behind them and an unknown destiny ahead, they had only one option: to trust in their preparations, in each other, and to take that first fateful step west. Thank you so much for joining us on this chapter of our journey into the past. It's a story of incredible courage and sacrifice. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shaped our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. In our last chapter, we explored the jumping-off towns where thousands of hopeful pioneers gathered. But how did these individual families, each with their own dreams and fears, transform into a cohesive force capable of crossing a continent? That's what we're diving into today in Chapter 4, The Wagon Train's Form. Imagine this. You've arrived in Independence, Missouri. The town is buzzing with energy, a chaotic mix of families, single men, merchants, and livestock. You've got your wagon, your supplies, and your family, but you can't make this journey alone. The vast, untamed wilderness ahead is filled with challenges, river crossings, steep mountains, and the simple, grinding reality of daily survival. The solution? Teamwork. The Great Migration wasn't an individual sprint. It was a collective marathon, and the first step was forming a wagon train. The process of forming a company was a fascinating blend of democracy and necessity. People would post notices around town, calling for meetings of all who intended to travel west. Families would gather, sizing each other up, looking for trustworthy, capable, and like-minded companions. It was a bit like a modern-day group project, but with life-or-death stakes. You were choosing the people you would depend on for the next 6 months. Discussions would last for hours, sometimes days. They'd talk about the best time to depart, usually late April or early May, to ensure the prairie grass was green enough for them and the livestock to graze. They'd debate the best route, although most would follow the well-trodden path. Most importantly, they'd look for shared values and a compatible group dynamic. A company might consist of anywhere from 20 to over 100 wagons. Smaller groups were more nimble, but larger ones offered greater security and more hands to help with a crisis. Once a group of families agreed to travel together, they had to establish order. This wasn't a casual road trip. It was a mobile society, and it needed rules and leadership to function. The pioneers, many of whom were deeply ingrained with American democratic ideals, would hold a formal election. They would nominate and vote for a captain. The captain was the big-picture leader, responsible for making final decisions on when to start, when to stop for the night, and the overall pace of the train. But the captain wasn't a dictator. He was supported by a council of elders or a committee, usually made up of experienced men, who would advise him on important matters. They would also elect other key officials. There might be a lieutenant or an assistant captain to take charge if the captain was unavailable. A sergeant-at-arms was often appointed to maintain order and resolve disputes, which, as you can imagine, were common when you have dozens of families living in close quarters under immense stress. Then came the rules. Before setting out, the entire company would gather to draft and sign a constitution or a set of bylaws. These documents were the law of the trail. They would outline everyone's duties and responsibilities. For example, rules would dictate the order of travel, ensuring that the same wagons weren't always stuck at the back eating dust. They'd set procedures for guard duty at night, a critical task to protect the camp from potential dangers and prevent their precious livestock from wandering off. These agreements also covered what to do in emergencies. If a wagon broke down, the rules might state that the entire train would stop to help with repairs. If someone became seriously ill, the company would decide collectively on the best course of action. By signing this document, each family was making a solemn promise to the others. We are in this together. We will share the burdens and the triumphs. It was this social contract that transformed a motley collection of strangers into a functioning, supportive community on wheels. Now let's talk about the icon of this entire era. The covered wagon. These weren't just vehicles. They were mobile homes, storage units, and a family's entire world packed into a small wooden box. The most common type was the Conestoga wagon, but a smaller, lighter version was often preferred for the long journey. These were affectionately nicknamed prairie schooners. Why prairie schooners? If you squinted your eyes and looked at a line of these wagons from a distance, with their white canvas covers billowing in the wind, they looked like a fleet of ships sailing across a vast, grassy ocean. The name was poetic, but it perfectly captured the sense of navigating a massive, open, and sometimes treacherous sea of land. Let's break down the anatomy of one of these prairie schooners. The wagon box or bed was typically about 10 feet long and 4 feet wide. It was made of tough, seasoned hardwood like hickory or oak to withstand the constant jolting. A clever design feature was that the wagon floor often curved upwards at both ends, a bit like a boat. This helped prevent a family's precious belongings from sliding out when going up or down steep hills. The entire wagon was meticulously crafted to be both durable and, to some extent, flexible. Over the top of the wagon box were large wooden or iron hoops. Draped over these hoops was the famous cover, usually made from 2 or 3 layers of heavy-duty canvas that had been waterproofed with linseed oil. This cover was the family's primary shelter from the scorching sun, sudden downpours, and biting winds. It was their roof, their walls, and their sanctuary. Inside, every square inch of space was utilized. Heavy items like flour barrels, tools, and cast-iron stoves were placed at the bottom for stability. Lighter items, bedding, clothes, and personal keepsakes were packed on top. Hooks were often screwed into the inside of the wagon bows to hang pots, pans, and rifles, keeping them within easy reach. But these wagons didn't move on their own. The real engines of the Oregon Trail were the animals that pulled them. This brings us to one of the great debates of the trail: oxen versus mules. Each had its passionate advocates. Let's start with the oxen. Oxen are essentially mature, castrated male cattle that have been trained as draft animals. They were the most popular choice for a few key reasons. First, they were steady and strong. An ox team could pull a heavily laden wagon, weighing over 2,500 pounds, day in and day out without complaint. They were incredibly durable, with tough hooves that could handle the rocky terrain better than horses. They were also less high-strung than mules, making them easier to manage, especially for a family that might not be experienced with animals. Perhaps the biggest advantage of oxen was their diet. They were grazers and could survive on the native prairie grasses found along the trail. This meant pioneers didn't have to haul as much expensive feed for them. Finally, and this might sound a bit grim, in a dire emergency, oxen could be used as a source of food. Many a family was saved from starvation by their loyal team. On the other side of the debate were the mules. Mules are the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse, and they inherited the best traits of both. They had the endurance and intelligence of a donkey, combined with the strength and speed of a horse. Mules could often travel faster than oxen, and their smaller, harder hooves made them particularly sure-footed in the mountains. They were also remarkably resilient to disease and heat. However, mules had disadvantages. They were more expensive to purchase upfront than oxen. They were also pickier eaters, often requiring grain or other supplementary feed, which had to be carried in the already overloaded wagon. And mules had a well-earned reputation for being stubborn. A mule that decided it didn't want to move was a formidable obstacle. They were also not a viable source of food, as their meat was considered unpalatable. Ultimately, the choice between oxen and mules often came down to a family's budget and personal preference. Most emigrants, especially those with limited funds, opted for the reliable, affordable, and low-maintenance ox. A typical team consisted of 4 to 6 oxen, yoked together in pairs, pulling the family's entire life westward. Learning to drive this team, using a series of verbal commands and a long whip called a bullwhip, was one of the first and most essential skills a pioneer had to master. And so, with their leaders elected, their rules agreed upon, their prairie schooners packed teorias, and their animal teams yoked, the companies were ready. The air would be thick with anticipation and a touch of sadness for the world being left behind. In the next chapter, we'll finally hit the trail, leaving the jumping-off towns behind and taking our first steps into the vast, open prairie. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. It's the human element of this story, the organization, the cooperation, the sheer determination that I find so compelling. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, travel safe.
Welcome back to our journey into the past. Today, we're diving into Chapter 5, the daily routine on the trail. What was it really like, day in and day out, for those pioneers heading west? Forget what you've seen in the movies. The reality was a relentless cycle of hard work, grit, and surprising moments of connection. Let's pull back the curtain on their everyday lives. The day began long before the sun even thought about peeking over the horizon. In the cold, pre-dawn darkness, a signal, often a bugle, call, or a gunshot, would shatter the silence. That was the cue. Everyone had to rise immediately. There was no snooze button on the prairie. The first task was to round up the livestock. Oxen and cattle, which had been grazing throughout the night, sometimes wandered surprisingly far. It was crucial to find every last one before the wagon train could even think about moving. While some wrangled the animals, others rekindled the previous night's embers to get the breakfast fire going. The air would slowly fill with the smell of sizzling bacon and brewing coffee. Breakfast was a hasty, simple affair. You'd likely have bacon, some hard bread or biscuits, and a cup of coffee to shake off the morning chill. There was no time for leisurely meals. Everything was about efficiency, about getting ready for the long day of walking ahead. Once the animals were yoked and hitched to the wagons, and the quick breakfast was consumed, the call would come to move out. Wagons. Oh. The massive train of canvas-topped schooners would lurch into motion, the creak of wooden wheels and the lowing of oxen becoming the soundtrack for the day. This wasn't a race. It was a slow, grinding march. Most people didn't ride in the wagons. They were packed to the brim with all their worldly possessions, leaving little to no room for passengers. So, men, women, and even children old enough to keep up, walked. They walked beside the wagons, guiding the animals, their feet sinking into dust or mud, mile after grueling mile. The journey was monotonous. Imagine walking for 10 to 12 hours straight, covering about 15 to 20 miles on a good day. The landscape, while sometimes beautiful, often became a repetitive blur of plains, hills, or desert. The sun beat down relentlessly, or chilling rain would soak them to the bone. Dust was a constant companion, getting into their eyes, their lungs, their food. It was a test of pure physical and mental endurance. The sheer weariness was a heavy burden, a bone-deep exhaustion that never fully went away. Each day was almost identical to the last. Wake, walk, sleep, repeat. This repetitive nature could be just as challenging as any sudden danger. As the sun began to dip towards the western horizon, the wagon master would search for a suitable place to make camp for the night. The ideal spot had three things: water for the people and animals, grass for grazing, and wood for the fires. Once the location was chosen, the wagons would often form a large circle, a defensive corral that provided a sense of security and kept the livestock from straying too far during the night. The moment the wagons stopped, the evening's work began. It was a well-practiced routine. The animals were unhitched and led to water and pasture. While they grazed and recovered, the camp came alive with the sounds of evening chores. Fires were lit, casting a warm, dancing glow against the twilight sky. The evening meal was the main meal of the day, but it was still incredibly simple. The staples were beans, bacon, and some form of bread, like cornbread or biscuits, baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven nestled in the hot coals. Sometimes, if a hunter was successful, there might be fresh game like buffalo or antelope. A welcome break from the monotony of salted meat. After dinner, the most magical part of the day would unfold. With the chores done and bellies full, a sense of community would settle over the camp. People would gather around the campfires, the flickering flames lighting up their weary faces. This was a time for connection, for sharing stories of the day's journey or tales from the homes they left behind. Someone might pull out a fiddle or a harmonica, and the quiet of the prairie would be filled with music. Laughter and song would drift through the circle of wagons. These nightly gatherings were the glue that held the wagon train together. People from different backgrounds, strangers just weeks before, became a tight-knit community. They shared hardships, offered support, and celebrated small victories together. They helped each other mend broken wagon wheels, tend to the sick, and watch over the children. Under a vast blanket of stars, far from any city lights, they found solace and strength in one another. It was in these quiet moments that the exhaustion of the day melted away, replaced by a shared hope for the new life that lay at the end of the trail. But as the fire died down to glowing embers, the camp would grow quiet once more. People would retreat to their wagons or bedrolls under the stars, seeking a few precious hours of rest before the bugle would once again signal the start of another long, hard day. The daily routine was a relentless grind, a testament to human endurance. Yet, within that grueling repetition, they forged a powerful sense of community and kept their dreams of a better future alive, one dusty mile at a time. Thank you so much for joining us on this leg of the journey. The story of these pioneers is one of incredible resilience. If you found this glimpse into their daily lives as fascinating as I do, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more chapters from history. We'll see you on the next part of the trail. Imagine leaving everything you've ever known behind, stepping out into a world so vast, so untouched, it feels like the dawn of creation itself. For the pioneers, the journey west wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about the profound, often overwhelming, experience of the journey itself. Today, we're exploring the natural beauty they encountered, a beauty that both challenged and inspired them every step of the way. As they left the familiar, rolling hills of the east, they entered the Great Plains. Picture this, a sea of grass stretching to the horizon in every direction, so immense it felt like the sky had fallen to meet the earth. Under the vast, open canopy of blue, the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass and the distant cry of a hawk. Days were spent under a relentless sun, the landscape a shimmering, golden tapestry. Nights brought a celestial spectacle, with stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch, a humbling reminder of their small place in this enormous land. It was a landscape of stark, minimalist beauty, a place that demanded patience and resilience. Then came the rivers, the lifeblood of the trail, but also its most formidable gatekeepers. Rivers like the Platte, a mile wide but deceptively shallow, its currents a maze of sandbars, or the powerful Snake in the mighty Columbia, their waters carving deep canyons through ancient rock. Crossing these wasn't just a physical challenge. It was a moment of complete surrender to nature's power. Yet, along their banks, life flourished. Groves of cottonwood trees offered precious shade, their leaves rustling like a gentle applause for the weary travelers. The sight of clear, running water after days on the dusty plains was a miracle, a promise of life and continuity in a world defined by movement. As the wagons rumbled further west, the landscape began to change again. The flat plains gave way to forested foothills, a welcome transition into a world of green. The air grew cooler, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. For children who had known nothing but open plains for months, a forest was a magical playground, a place of mystery and discovery. But for the pioneers, these woods were also a new kind of challenge. The trails narrowed, winding through ancient trees that stood like silent sentinels, their presence a testament to the endurance of nature. They had two felled trees to clear a path, the sharp crack of an axe echoing through the quiet woods, a sound of human will against primordial wilderness. And then, looming in the distance, they saw them, the mountains. First, as a faint, jagged line on the horizon, then growing larger each day until they filled the entire view, their snow-capped peaks piercing the clouds. The Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, were not just obstacles, they were monuments. Imagine seeing such grandeur for the first time. The sheer scale was incomprehensible, inspiring a sense of awe that bordered on spiritual reverence. The pioneers felt dwarfed by these stony giants, their personal struggles and ambitions put into perspective by the silent, eternal power of the peaks. The journey through the mountain passes was the most grueling part of the trail, a test of spirit and body. Yet, the reward was a view from the top of the world, a panorama of valleys, forests, and distant plains that made them feel like they could see forever. The pioneer's journey was also marked by the rhythm of the seasons, each bringing its own brand of beauty and hardship. Spring was a time of rebirth and hope. After a long, hard winter, the first wildflowers blooming on the prairie were a vibrant splash of color against the greening landscape. The air was fresh, filled with the songs of birds returning north. Rivers, swollen with snowmelt, ran fast and cold, but the promise of new life was everywhere. It was a season to push forward with renewed energy. Then came the intense, unwavering heat of summer. The sun beat down on the plains, turning the earth to baked clay and the air into a shimmering haze. Thunderstorms would erupt with terrifying suddenness, lightning splitting the sky and rain, turning the dusty trails into impassable mud. Summer was a season of endurance, a test of physical limits. Yet, it was also a time of incredible abundance. Wild berries ripened in thickets, providing a welcome, sweet relief. The long days meant more hours for travel, pushing them ever closer to their goal. Autumn brought a palpable change. The air grew crisp, and the relentless heat of summer finally broke. A final, glorious burst of color swept across the land. The leaves of aspens in the mountains turned a brilliant gold, shimmering in the wind. The prairie grasses cured to a rich, tawny brown. But the autumn winds also carried a warning. They were a reminder that winter was coming, and the high mountain passes would soon be choked with snow. There was an urgency to the season, a race against time. The beauty of autumn was tinged with a sense of foreboding, a beautiful but stark reminder that nature's clock was ticking. In every sunset that painted the sky, in every river they crossed, in every mountain they climbed, the pioneers found something more than just a path forward. They found a deep, personal connection to the land. Nature was not a passive backdrop to their journey. It was an active participant. It was the source of their greatest hardships, the blizzards, the droughts, the treacherous terrain, but it was also the source of their profoundest moments of wonder. The raw, untamed beauty of the American West shaped their character, fostering resilience, humility, and an enduring sense of awe. They were seeing a continent in its purest form, a world untouched by the hands of their generation. That experience of being the first to witness such landscapes became an inseparable part of their story, a legacy of wonder passed down through generations. They weren't just crossing a continent, they were journeying through the heart of nature itself, and in doing so, they were forever changed. Thank you so much for joining us on this part of the journey. The story of the pioneers is a powerful reminder of the deep connection between humanity and the natural world. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more chapters from history. We love hearing from you, so please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring. Welcome back to our journey. Today, we delve into Chapter 7, Trials and Hardships. The chapter where the romantic vision of the trail dissolves into a harsh, unforgiving reality. The path forward was not paved with gold, but wheat, great sweat, and often tears. This is the story of the true cost of the journey west. Imagine waking up not to the gentle rays of dawn, but to a gnawing ache in your stomach, a feverish chill running through your veins. Illness was a constant, unwelcome companion. Diseases we now consider minor could be a death sentence on the trail. Cholera, dysentery, mountain fever. They swept through wagon trains with terrifying speed, leaving devastation in their wake. There were no doctors, no pharmacies, just rudimentary first aid kits and desperate home remedies. The strong grew weak, and the weak, well, many didn't make it. And then there was the fatigue. Not just the tiredness you feel after a long day, but a deep, bone-crushing exhaustion that seeped into your very soul. Day after day, it was the same routine. Wake before sunrise, yoke the oxen, walk 15 to 20 miles over punishing terrain, set up camp, perform your chores, and collapse into a fitful sleep, only to do it all over again. The physical toll was immense, aging people decades in just a few short months. Their faces, etched with lines of worry and weariness, told a story of relentless endurance. This exhaustion was fueled by another constant fear: hunger. Every pioneer family started with what they thought were ample supplies, carefully packed barrels of flour, bacon, coffee, and sugar. But the trail had a way of stretching on, longer than anticipated. Accidents happened, a wagon overturns in a river, and suddenly, a month's worth of precious flour is gone, swept away by the current. Miscalculations were made. The land didn't always provide the game they'd hoped for. The daily rationing became a source of constant anxiety. Every spoonful of flour, every strip of bacon, was measured with agonizing precision. You could see the worry in a mother's eyes as she divided a small piece of bread among her hungry children, knowing it wasn't enough. The pioneers kept meticulous diaries, and the entries are filled with mentions of their dwindling supplies. Flour nearly gone, one might read. Only 3 days of bacon left. It was a slow-ticking clock, a constant reminder of their fragility in this vast, empty wilderness. The fear of starvation was as real and as present as the dust on the trail. As if illness and hunger weren't enough, the pioneers were completely at the mercy of the weather. The sky, which could be a brilliant, hopeful blue one moment, could turn into a menacing, dark monster the next. Imagine being caught on the open prairie, with nowhere to hide, as a thunderstorm of epic proportions rolls in. The lightning wasn't just a flash in the distance. It was a deafening crackle that struck the ground nearby, making the very earth tremble. The rain came down not in drops, but in solid sheets, turning the dry, dusty trail into a quagmire of thick, impassable mud. Wagons would sink up to their axles, and exhausted oxen, already weak from the journey, would struggle in vain to pull them free. And the cold. As they climbed into the mountains, summer could turn to winter in an instant. Unexpected snowstorms would blanket the landscape, blinding the travelers and chilling them to the bone. Their summer clothing offered little protection against the biting wind and freezing temperatures. Frostbite was a constant danger. Conversely, they also faced relentless drought. Days, sometimes weeks, would pass under a scorching sun with no sign of rain. Water sources dried up. The animals suffered, their tongues swelling from thirst. The people suffered, their lips cracking, their bodies dehydrated, as they searched desperately for the next creek or spring, which might be miles or even days away. This brutal environment was a crucible, but it was hardest on the most vulnerable. Think of the children. While some diarists speak of their resilience, of moments of play amidst the hardship, the reality was grim. They walked 4 miles, their small legs struggling to keep up. They were more susceptible to disease and the harsh elements. The trail was a landscape of loss, and far too many small, unmarked graves were left along its path. Then there were the elderly, who had perhaps joined the journey to keep their families together. Their bodies, already worn by a lifetime of hard work, were pushed past their limits. The constant jolting of the wagon, the poor food, the exposure it was often too much to bear. They were a repository of wisdom and family history, but on the trail, they were often seen as just another mouth to feed, another burden on the already strained resources. And we must not forget the expectant mothers. Women who faced the terrifying prospect of giving birth in the middle of nowhere, with no medical assistance, no sanitation, and no rest. A birth that should have been a joyous occasion was fraught with peril for both mother and child. Yet these women persevered. They gave birth in the back of a shaking wagon, and a day or two later, they were expected to be up and walking again, caring for a newborn while continuing the arduous trek. Their strength is almost unimaginable. These trials see sickness, the hunger, the weather, and the specific struggles of the young, the old, and the expectant formed the grim tapestry of the westward journey. It was a relentless test of human endurance, a constant battle for survival against overwhelming odds. The dream of a new life in a fertile land was a powerful motivator, but the price of that dream was paid every single day, in every painful step taken along the trail. The story of the West is not just one of triumph, but of profound hardship and incredible sacrifice. Thank you for joining us for this sobering look at the realities of the trail. It's a testament to the human spirit that so many endured and pushed forward. If you found this chapter insightful, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories from our shared past. We'll see you next time. Upbeat, engaging music fades into the background. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our historical journey. Today, we're rediving deep into one of the most pivotal and often misunderstood aspects of early American history: the initial encounters between European settlers and the native peoples of the land. This isn't just a story of conflict. It's a complex tapestry woven with threads of cooperation, misunderstanding, cultural exchange, and profound human connection. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's explore Chapter 8. Encounters with native peoples. When we picture these first meetings, our minds often jump to scenes of tension. And while that was certainly part of the story, it's far from the whole picture. In reality, many of the first interactions were characterized by peaceful trade and mutual curiosity. Imagine this: a group of weary, disoriented settlers, thousands of miles from home, struggling to survive in an unfamiliar environment. They lacked knowledge of the local plants, the behavior of the wildlife, and the rhythm of the seasons. Survival was anything but guaranteed. It was in this vulnerable state that many encountered the land's original inhabitants. For countless Native American communities, the initial response to these newcomers was not hostility, but a mixture of caution and hospitality. They possessed generations of accumulated knowledge about the land, knowledge that was invaluable to the settlers. We have numerous accounts, from early diaries and letters, describing how Native Americans taught settlers which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to cultivate native crops, like corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, which would become staples of the colonial diet. This assistance wasn't just about food. Native guides were absolutely essential for navigation. The vast, untracked wilderness of North America was an intimidating and dangerous place. Rivers, mountains, and dense forests formed a labyrinth that would have been impassable for the settlers alone. Native guides, with their intimate knowledge of the terrain, led expeditions, helped establish trade routes, and enabled communication between different settlements and tribes. They were, in many ways, the first cartographers and diplomats of this new, shared world. Trade was another crucial pillar of these early relationships. It was a two-way street, a dynamic exchange. Settlers brought metal tools, firearms, textiles, and glass beads items that were novel and highly valued by many tribes. In return, Native Americans offered furs, particularly beaver pelts, which were in high demand in Europe, as well as food, handcrafted goods, and vital information. These early marketplaces were bustling centers of cross-cultural interaction, where goods, languages, and ideas were exchanged. For a time, a delicate balance of codependence existed, with each group benefiting from the other's presence. However, it would be a disservice to history to paint this picture with only bright, peaceful colors. The relationship was incredibly complex and fraught with tension from the very beginning. The core of many conflicts stemmed from a fundamental clash of worldviews, particularly concerning the concept of land. For most European settlers, land was a commodity, something to be bought, sold, owned, and divided with fences and deeds. This idea of private, exclusive ownership was completely foreign to most Native American cultures. For them, land was a communal resource, a sacred entity to be shared and stewarded, not owned by an individual. You can imagine the misunderstandings that arose. When a settler purchased a tract of land, he believed he was acquiring exclusive rights to it forever. The Native Americans involved in the transaction, however, may have believed they were simply granting permission for the settlers to use the land for a season, to hunt or farm alongside them. When fences went up and Native people were told they could no longer access their ancestral hunting grounds or sacred sites, confusion quickly turned to anger and betrayal. This single, profound difference in perspective was the seed of countless future conflicts. Communication barriers also played a huge role. In the beginning, neither side spoke the other's language. Interactions relied on gestures, rudimentary sign language, and a handful of individuals who managed to learn a smattering of the other's tongue. In such a situation, it's incredibly easy for intentions to be misread. A simple gesture could be misinterpreted as a threat. A cultural norm, like not making direct eye contact, could be seen as a sign of dishonesty. These small misunderstandings could spiral into suspicion, fear, and eventually open hostility. As the settler population grew, so did the pressure on resources. Forests were cleared for farmland, rivers were dammed, and game was hunted at an unsustainable rate. This directly impacted the native way of life, which was intricately tied to the natural environment. Competition for land and resources became a major source of friction. Treaties were made and broken, promises were forgotten, and a cycle of raids and retaliations began to take hold in many regions. It's a tragic part of our story, where initial curiosity and cooperation gave way to a struggle for control and survival. The balance that had once existed was tipping, and the consequences would be devastating. Yet, even amidst the rising tensions and conflicts, something beautiful and uniquely American was happening. A profound cultural exchange. This wasn't something that was planned or dictated. It happened organically, in the spaces between the official meetings and the battles. It happened in the day-to-day interactions between ordinary people. Let's talk about food again. It goes so much deeper than just learning to grow corn. Think about the dishes we consider quintessentially American today. Barbecue, cornbread, clam bakes, maple syrup, jerky. All of these have deep roots in Native American foodways and cooking techniques. Settlers not only adopted the crops, but also learned the methods of preparing and preserving them from their native neighbors. The very flavor of American cuisine was shaped in these early kitchens and campfires. The exchange of skills was also transformative. Native Americans were masters of living in the North American environment. They taught settlers how to build canoes for river travel, how to make snowshoes for winter journeys, and how to use local plants for medicinal purposes. This was practical, life-saving knowledge. On the other side, Native Americans selectively adopted European technologies. Metal tools like axes and knives made daily tasks easier, and firearms, while a source of immense conflict, also changed the dynamics of hunting and warfare between tribes. But perhaps the most enchanting part of this exchange was the sharing of stories. In the quiet of the evening, around a shared fire, myths, legends, and histories were passed back and forth. Settlers wrote down their impressions of native folklore, and native oral traditions began to incorporate elements of the strange new world the settlers represented. This was the first blending of the old world and the new, a sharing of souls and imaginations. It's a reminder that even in times of great stress and change, the human impulse to connect through storytelling is a powerful force. So, as we close this chapter, we're left with a relationship that defies simple labels. It wasn't just good or bad. It was a deeply human story, filled with moments of grace, generosity, and shared humanity, as well as moments of profound tragedy, misunderstanding, and conflict. The encounters between settlers and native peoples were the crucible in which a new, complex, and often contradictory American identity was first forged. The legacy of these first meetings, the cultural exchanges, the broken treaties, the shared bloodlines, the contested lands continues to shape our society in countless ways to this very day. Understanding this complex beginning is essential to understanding the nation we have become. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration. It's a topic that deserves our thoughtful attention, and I'm so glad we could walk through it together. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We have so much more history to uncover. Until next time, stay curious. Howdy folks, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. Today, we're diving into one of the most formidable and constant challenges the pioneers faced. The rivers. Forget everything you think you know about a peaceful river crossing. For the immigrants, these waterways were life-or-death obstacles. This is Chapter 9. The rivers and their challenges. The trail was defined by its rivers. First, the Platte River. It was described as a mile wide and an inch deep. But that was a dangerous oversimplification. Its shallow, braided channels were riddled with quicksand, ready to swallow a wagon wheel, or even an entire ox, in moments. The current, while not always deep, was deceptively strong. A misstep could send a wagon careening, its contents everything, a family-owned spilling into the silty water. Getting wagons across the Platte was a monumental task, often taking days of back-breaking labor, double-teaming oxen, and constant vigilance against the shifting, sandy riverbed. It was a wet, muddy, and exhausting introduction to the trials that lay ahead. After conquering the Platte, the pioneers faced an even more treacherous foe, the Snake River in present-day Idaho. The Snake was nothing like the Platte. It was deep, cold, and carved through rugged canyons. Its current was swift and powerful, a churning torrent that showed no mercy. Fording the Snake was often impossible. Emigrants wrote in their diaries about the terrifying roar of the water and the sheer cliffs that lined its banks. This wasn't a river you could just walk across. The decision of where and how to cross was fraught with peril. A wrong choice could be, and often was, fatal. The emotional toll of these crossings was immense. Imagine standing on the bank, watching your wagon, your mobile home begin to tip in the current. You see your precious supplies, the tools you need to build a new life, the heirlooms from a home you'll never see again, all being swept away. The panic is indescribable. Worse still was the loss of livestock. These animals were the engines of the journey. Losing an ox or a mule wasn't just an economic loss. It could strand a family miles from anywhere, with no way to move forward. The sight of a struggling, drowning animal was a heartbreaking and all-too-common spectacle that haunted the pioneers. And then there was the ultimate tragedy, the loss of human life. Children, small and curious, could be swept away in an instant. Adults, strong and capable, could be pulled under by the current while trying to guide a wagon or rescue an animal. The river would take them, and often their bodies were never recovered. The family would have to move on, leaving their loved one behind in a watery, unmarked grave. The grief was profound, a raw wound carried for the rest of the journey. Diaries are filled with terse, heartbreaking entries. Lost little Mary in the river today. We must go on the psychological strain of such loss, compounded by the constant exhaustion and fear, is almost unimaginable. Faced with such dangers, pioneers had to get creative. When fording was too risky, they looked for alternatives. Sometimes, entrepreneurial souls would set up makeshift ferries at key crossing points. These were often little more than a few logs lashed together, or a wagon bed caulked with tar to make it float. The ferryman would charge an exorbitant fee, knowing the emigrants had no other choice. Paying could mean spending a family's last dollar, but not paying could mean risking everything. It was a desperate gamble. If no ferry was available, pioneers would have to build their own rafts. They would spend days felling trees, lashing them together with rope and chain, hoping their creation was sturdy enough to bear the weight of their possessions. They'd disassemble their wagons, float them across piece by piece, and then swim the terrified livestock over The whole process was slow, arduous, and fraught with its own dangers. A poorly constructed raft could break apart midstream, with the same disastrous results as a failed fording. Each successful crossing felt like a miracle, a brief moment of relief before the trail presented its next challenge. Finally, after months of hardship, the pioneers reached the last great barrier, the mighty Columbia River. To the exhausted travelers, the Columbia was a horrifying spectacle. It was a massive, churning expanse of water, flanked by steep, imposing cliffs. Fording was out of the question. The only way down the river was on large, professionally run rafts and bateaux through the treacherous rapids of the Columbia River Gorge. This final water passage was notoriously dangerous, with whirlpools and rocks that could splinter a raft in seconds. Many pioneers, having survived so much, lost everything on this final leg. The choice was either to brave the river or to take the Barlow Road, a historic toll road over the Cascade Mountains. That was itself a journey of immense hardship. There were no easy answers on the Oregon Trail. The rivers the Platte, the Snake, the Columbia were not just geographic features. They were gatekeepers. They tested the pioneers' strength, their ingenuity, and their spirit. They inflicted loss and sorrow, but for those who made it across, they also forged an unbreakable resilience. They were a reminder that the promise of a new life in Oregon would not be given. It had to be earned, one dangerous river at a time. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the river crossings of the Oregon Trail. It's a story of incredible courage and heartbreaking loss. If you found this chapter of history as compelling as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the trail. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. We'll see you further down the trail.
Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. Today, we're diving into Chapter 10, Landmarks of Hope and Despair. Imagine you've been traveling for months across a seemingly endless prairie. The landscape is vast, monotonous, and you're starting to wonder if you're even going the right way. Then, on the horizon, a shape appears. It's not just another hill or a clump of trees. It's something you've read about in your guidebook. It's a landmark. For the pioneers, these natural markers were more than just interesting geological formations. They were beacons of hope, navigational aids in a world without GPS, and milestones that proved they were still on the right path. They were signposts on a journey of thousands of miles, and each one carried a powerful psychological weight. Let's explore some of the most famous and what they meant to the weary travelers. One of the first major landmarks to greet pioneers in what is now Nebraska was Chimney Rock. You can just picture it. After weeks of seeing nothing but flat grassland, this bizarre, towering spire suddenly juts into the sky. It looks exactly like its name suggests, a tall, slender chimney rising from a conical base. For emigrants, seeing Chimney Rock was a profound moment. It was confirmation. The guidebooks, the stories they'd heard, they were all true. They were on the correct route. It was a tangible sign of progress, a massive checkmark on their mental map. Many pioneers wrote about it in their diaries, describing the awe and relief they felt. It was a popular spot to camp, rest, and take stock before pushing further west. But these landmarks weren't just for looking at. They became a kind of public bulletin board, a guestbook carved in stone. Take, for example, Independence Rock in Wyoming. This massive granite dome, looking like a giant turtle shell on the prairie, earned its name because wagon trains aimed to reach it by the 4th of July, making it here by Independence Day meant you were on schedule to cross the mountains before the first snows of winter, a critical deadline. Reaching Independence Rock was a cause for celebration. But more than that, it was a place to leave your mark. Thousands of pioneers carved their names, hometowns, and the date of their passage onto its surface. Why? It was a way of saying, I was here, I made it this far. I am part of this great migration. For those who came after, finding the names of friends or family who had passed through earlier was an incredible moment of connection, a message from the past that they weren't alone. They were following in the footsteps of others, part of a shared, monumental effort. These inscriptions transformed a natural rock into a living monument of human perseverance. It became known as the Great Register of the Desert, not far from Independence. Rock stood another dramatic formation, Devil's Gate. This was a narrow, deep gorge, carved by the Sweetwater River through a ridge of solid rock, while the wagons had to bypass the chasm. Its ominous name and striking appearance made it another unforgettable milestone. The sight of the river disappearing into this dark, sheer-walled cleft in the earth was both awe-inspiring and a little unsettling. It was a reminder of the powerful, untamed forces of nature that surrounded them every single day. For some, the name itself might have felt like a warning of the hardships still to come as they approached the rugged Rocky Mountains. Each of these landmarks, Chimney Rock, Independence Rock, Devil's Gate, and many others like Scott's Bluff and Courthouse Rock, served a dual purpose. On one hand, they were sources of immense relief and hope. They were proof of progress, tangible evidence that the long, hard miles were adding up. Reaching one of these points was a victory, a moment to breathe and say, "Okay, we're still on track." It broke the monotony of the journey and gave travelers a concrete goal to focus on for the next leg of the trip. But on the other hand, reaching a landmark also brought a wave of exhaustion. It was a reminder of just how far they had already come, and a stark illustration of how far they still had to go. Imagine climbing to the top of Independence Rock. You feel a sense of accomplishment. But as you look west, you don't see a finish line. You see more plains, and beyond them, the jagged, intimidating peaks of the mountains you still have to cross. The relief was always mixed with the heavy realization that the most difficult parts of the journey were likely still ahead. This emotional mix of hope and despair is a central theme of the pioneer experience. Every sunrise brought the hope of a good day's travel, but every sunset brought the fatigue of another grueling day on the trail. The landmarks magnified this feeling. There were celebrations of progress, but also sober way stations measuring the toll the journey had taken on people, animals, and equipment. The act of carving a name into stone was a powerful act of defiance against the despair. It was a declaration of identity and existence in a landscape that could feel overwhelming and dehumanizing. In a place where your life could be extinguished by disease, an accident, or the elements, leaving your name behind was a small act of permanence. A whisper to the future that you had endured. It was a symbol of hope, a belief that you, too, would reach the end of the trail and build a new life. These landmarks of the Oregon Trail are more than just geological curiosities. They are emotional touchstones that tell the story of the human spirit. They mark points of relief, moments of celebration, and sobering reminders of the long road ahead. They are chapters in the epic story of westward expansion, written not just in diaries and letters, but carved directly into the very stone of the American West, forever marking the path of hope and despair. Thank you so much for joining me on this leg of our journey. It's a story of incredible resilience, and these landmarks stand today as silent witnesses to it all. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you on the trail.
Imagine you've packed everything you own into a single wagon. Your family is with you, and your dreams of a new life in the West are bright and full of hope. The journey is long, the work is hard, but the spirit of adventure is strong. But what if the greatest danger wasn't a river crossing or a steep mountain pass? What if the most terrifying threat was invisible, silent, and deadly? Today, we're rejourneying back to the mid-19th century to uncover one of the darkest chapters of the westward expansion. The constant, terrifying battle against disease on the trail. As thousands of pioneers set out on trails like the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails, they formed massive, moving communities. These wagon trains, sometimes stretching for miles, were a magnificent sight. But they were also the perfect breeding ground for disease. Of all the sicknesses that stalked the pioneers, one name was whispered with the most dread: cholera. They called it the unseen destroyer. It could strike with shocking speed. A person could be healthy in the morning and gone by nightfall. The symptoms were horrific and swift, leading to severe dehydration. In an era before germ theory was widely understood, the pioneers had no idea what was causing it. We now know cholera is a waterborne illness, spread through contaminated food and water. Think about the conditions on the trail. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people and their livestock were using the same rivers for drinking, cooking, bathing, and as a toilet. Campsites were used over and over by different wagon trains, meaning the ground and water sources could become heavily contaminated. A single infected person could unknowingly contaminate a water supply, leading to a full-blown epidemic that would sweep through the wagon train like wildfire. The pioneers were caught in a trap of their own making, unknowingly poisoning the very resources they needed to survive. The fear was constant and palpable. Every stomachache, every bout of sickness, sent a wave of panic through the camp. Was it just something they ate, or was it the beginning of a cholera outbreak? People would watch their friends and family members, people they had shared meals and dreams with just hours before, succumb to the illness with terrifying speed. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine trying to care for a sick child while also trying to keep your other children from drinking the same water, all while knowing your own health was hanging by a thread. This constant dread was as much a part of the journey as the turning of the wagon wheels. In the face of this invisible enemy, the pioneers were tragically ill. Medical knowledge on the frontier was extremely limited. There were very few trained doctors who made the journey. And even those who did, had little understanding of diseases like cholera. Their treatments were often based on outdated theories, like balancing the body's humors. They might resort to bloodletting, or administering harsh substances like calomel, a mercury compound, which often did more harm than good. For the most part, families had to rely on themselves. Most of the medical care fell to the women, who acted as family nurses. They relied on home remedies and patent medicines packed away in a small medical chest. These chests might contain laudanum, an opium tincture used for pain and diarrhea, various herbal concoctions, and other cure-alls of the day. While their intentions were good and their care was compassionate, these remedies were utterly ineffective against the bacterial onslaught of cholera. They were trying to fight a microscopic monster with folk wisdom and prayer, a battle they were destined to lose. The pioneers' greatest assets were their resilience and their compassion for one another. But against cholera, that was rarely enough. The sheer number of deaths was staggering. Historians estimate that disease, particularly cholera, was the single greatest cause of death on the overland trails, far surpassing accidents or conflicts. It's said that the Oregon Trail was lined with graves, so many that you could practically follow the path by the markers left behind. These weren't grand funerals. There was no time. A person would die, and the wagon train had to keep moving. The survivors would stop for just a few hours, long enough to dig a shallow grave by the side of the trail. The burials were heartbreakingly simple. The body was often wrapped in a blanket or a piece of canvas, as wood for coffins was a rare luxury on the treeless plains. They would hold a brief, sorrowful service, say a prayer, and then mark the spot. Sometimes it was with a simple wooden cross, perhaps with a name and date carved into it. Other times, it was just a pile of stones to keep animals away. One of the most common fears was that the graves wouldn't remain undisturbed. Emigrants wrote in their diaries of seeing graves that had been dug up by wolves. To prevent this, they would sometimes bury their dead in the middle of the trail and then drive the heavy wagons and livestock over the grave to pack the earth down, erasing any sign of it to protect their loved one's final resting place. Think about the profound grief of that act. Leaving a family member, a spouse, a child, a parent in an unmarked grave thousands of miles from either your old home or your new one. You had to turn your back and keep walking west, carrying that loss with you for the rest of the journey and for the rest of your life. The diaries and letters from this period are filled with accounts of this sorrow. They are a testament to the emotional endurance required to complete the journey. Each grave was a story of a dream cut short, a family shattered. So, while we often romanticize the westward expansion with images of brave pioneers and rugged cowboys, it's crucial to remember the grim reality they faced. The journey was not just a test of physical strength and endurance, but a trial by fire against invisible forces they couldn't understand or fight. The story of disease on the trail is a sobering reminder of the true cost of manifest destiny, paid for in the countless, often anonymous, lives left behind in the dust. The simple wooden crosses and piles of stones along the trail are silent monuments to the immense human sacrifice that paved the way west. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's a powerful and humbling story to tell. If you found this chapter of history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. We'll see you then.
Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back in time to the Oregon Trail, but we're reshifting our focus from the broad strokes of the journey to the very heart of the wagon trains, the women and children. Their story is one of incredible strength, resilience, and the quiet, daily heroism that often goes unnoticed in the grand sagas of westward expansion. When we picture the pioneers, we often think of rugged men driving wagons and scouting the trail. But what about the other half of the story? The women were the glue that held families and entire communities together on this grueling 2,000-mile trek. Their days were a relentless cycle of work that began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. Imagine waking up in the pre-dawn cold. While the men prepared the oxen, the women were already busy. Their first task was to build a fire, often with damp wood or buffalo chips, to cook the morning meal. This wasn't a simple affair. It was usually cornmeal, mush, bacon, and coffee, all prepared over an open flame, with the wind whipping dust into everything. After a hasty breakfast, everything had to be cleaned and packed away with meticulous care, ensuring nothing was lost or broken before the wagons started rolling. The workday didn't stop once the wagons were moving. Many women walked alongside the wagons to lighten the load on the weary animals. While walking, they weren't idle. They would knit socks, mend torn clothes, or keep a watchful eye on the children. Their hands were never still. They were the keepers of the family's well-being, the managers of dwindling supplies, and the anchors in a world of constant motion and uncertainty. When the wagons stopped for the noon meal, the entire process would repeat itself. Unpack, build a fire, cook, serve, clean, and pack up again, all within a short break. It was an exhausting routine, day in and day out, for months on end. But perhaps their most crucial role was that of the caregiver. On the trail, there were no doctors, no clinics. The women were the nurses. They tended to injuries, from simple cuts and blisters to more serious wounds from accidents. They nursed their families through illnesses like cholera, dysentery, and mountain fever, using what little knowledge and herbal remedies they had. They were the midwives, bringing new life into the world in the most primitive of conditions. The emotional toll of watching loved ones suffer, and sometimes perish, was immense, yet they had to carry on for the sake of the survivors. One pioneer woman, Amelia Stewart Knight, wrote in her diary, "My day's work is not done until I have patched and mended the children's clothes for the next day." This simple entry speaks volumes. It wasn't just about the physical labor. It was about providing a sense of normalcy and care amidst the chaos. It was about mending a shirt so a child felt clothed and loved. It was about baking bread, a rare treat on the trail, to boost morale. These acts of love and dedication were the bedrock of their family's survival. They transformed the cramped, dusty space of a covered wagon into a home. Now, let's talk about the youngest pioneers, the children. Their experience on the trail was a strange mix of adventure and arduous labor. For many, the journey started with excitement. The vast, open prairies were a giant playground, a world of new sights and sounds. But the novelty quickly wore off, replaced by the harsh reality of the trek. Children were expected to contribute from a very young age. They walked for miles and miles, their small legs struggling to keep pace. Their chores were essential. Young boys, some as young as 8 or 9, were tasked with herding the livestock, the family's most valuable asset. This was a huge responsibility. A moment of inattention could mean losing the animals to a stampede, a predator, or simply letting them wander off, which could spell disaster for the family. Girls helped their mothers with all the domestic chores. They fetched water from rivers, gathered fuel for the fire, helped with the cooking and cleaning, and cared for their younger siblings. They learned to be resilient and resourceful far beyond their years. Their childhoods were cut short, replaced by the duties of adulthood, but they were still children. They found moments of play wherever they could. They'd chase each other across the plains, gather wildflowers, or invent games with rocks and sticks. These small moments of joy were a vital escape from the monotony and hardship of the trail. The journals of pioneers often mention the laughter of children, a sound that brought a sense of hope to the weary adults. The bonds forged during this journey were unbreakable. Children relied on their parents for safety, and parents drew strength from their children's resilience. The family unit was tested to its absolute limit, and for those who made it, the shared experience created a foundation of love and mutual reliance that would last a lifetime. Mothers, in particular, were pillars of emotional strength. They comforted their children's fears, sang them to sleep, and held the family together through grief and loss. Imagine the strength it took for a mother to bury a child in a shallow grave on the side of the trail, and then have to climb back into the wagon and continue westward the next morning. It's a level of fortitude that is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. These women carried the weight of their family's past and the hope for their future on their shoulders. So, when we remember the Oregon Trail, let's remember the full picture. Let's honor the women who turned canvas-covered wagons into homes, who nursed the sick, and who held their families together with sheer force of will. And let's remember the children who walked, worked, and endured, trading their childhoods for the promise of a new life in the West. Their stories are not just footnotes in history. They are a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of family love in the face of unimaginable hardship. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as moving as I did, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you next time.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. So far, we've faced treacherous rivers, relentless heat on the plains, and the constant threat of disease. But now, looming on the horizon, is the greatest challenge of all. The Rocky Mountains. For the pioneers, these weren't just majestic peaks. They were a formidable, almost mythical barrier standing between them and their dreams of a new life in the West. Reaching them was one thing, but crossing them, that was a trial that would test the limits of their endurance, their resources, and their very spirit. Today, we delve into Chapter 13, Approaching the Mountains, and witness the heart-wrenching decisions these families had to make when faced with an impassable obstacle. The ascent began gradually, but soon the trail transformed. The wide-open prairies were replaced by narrow, winding paths that clung precariously to the sides of mountains. The air grew thin, making every breath a chore for both man and beast. The wagons, which had been sturdy homes on wheels, now seemed clumsy and oversized. They scraped against rock walls, their wheels threatening to slip off the edge of sheer drop. The strain was immense. Axles, which had held strong for over 1,000 miles, finally began to crack and splinter under the relentless pressure of the incline. Wheels buckled, and entire wagons would lurch to a halt, blocking the path for everyone behind them. A breakdown in the mountains was a crisis. There were no trading posts here, no spare parts for the taking. Every repair was a feat of ingenuity, often carried out with numb fingers in the biting wind. But even with successful repairs, a stark reality began to set in for every family. The oxen and mules were weakening. They were exhausted, underfed, and simply could not pull the heavy loads up these steep grades. The pioneers had reached a point of no return. They couldn't go back, but it was becoming clear they couldn't go forward either, not with everything they owned. A decision had to be made, and it was one that would break their hearts. They called it lightening the load. It sounds simple, a practical solution to a logistical problem. But what did it really mean? It meant standing beside your wagon, the one that held everything you had in the world, and choosing what to leave behind forever. The first things to go were the large, heavy pieces of furniture, a beautifully carved rocking chair, a solid oak dresser that had been in the family for generations. These were symbols of the home they had left and the home they hoped to build. With heavy hearts, they were pushed over the side of the trail, left to splinter on the rocks below. Other families passing by would see these discarded items and know that they too would soon face the same agonizing choice. The trail began to look like a graveyard of abandoned dreams. It wasn't just furniture, heavy iron stoves, farming plows that were meant to break the soil of their new homesteads, and anvils for blacksmithing were all deemed too cumbersome. But the choices became more personal, more painful. Sacks of flour and bacon, precious food supplies, had to be rationed and sometimes discarded to save the animals. It was a desperate gamble. Abandon the food that would sustain them in the hope that the weakened oxen could get them over the mountains faster to where they might find more. Every item left behind was a piece of their future security, tossed away on a rocky path. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching sacrifices were the personal treasures, the items that held not monetary value, but sentimental weight. A grandmother's spinning wheel, a child's heavy wooden toy chest, a trunk filled with wedding china carefully wrapped to survive the journey. These weren't just objects, they were memories. They were tangible links to a life and to loved ones they would never see again. Leaving them on the side of the trail felt like a betrayal. It was like abandoning a piece of their own family history, leaving it to be weathered by the sun and snow. Imagine a mother unwrapping a small, leather-bound Bible, feeling its weight in her hands. For months, it had been a source of comfort and faith. But it was heavy, or a father looking at his collection of books, Shakespeare, philosophy, history, the very tools he planned to use to educate his children in their new home. But paper is heavy, and books are a luxury the mountains would not allow. The pages of family Bibles were sometimes torn out, keeping the vital records of births and deaths, but leaving the rest, the sight of books, with their pages fluttering in the wind, scattered among discarded furniture and tools, became a common and sorrowful sight along these mountain passes. This process wasn't just a physical unburdening, it was an emotional crucible. It stripped the pioneers down to the bare essentials of survival. Arguments could break out within families. What was more important, a bag of seeds for the spring planting, or a treasured family portrait? These decisions forced people to confront what they truly valued. Was it the past, represented by these heirlooms, or future, represented by the slim chance of making it to Oregon? For many, the emotional toll was devastating. They were leaving pieces of their identities scattered across the Rocky Mountains. The journey was no longer just about reaching a destination. It was about what they would have left of themselves when they finally arrived. They were physically lighter, but their hearts were heavier than ever. As we look back at these graveyards of hope, we see the true cost of westward expansion. It wasn't measured in dollars, but in sacrificed memories and broken hearts. The pioneers who made it over the mountains were changed people. They had learned a harsh lesson, but in the face of nature's immense power, possessions mean very little. Survival was everything. They carried with them not the physical objects, but the memories of what they had lost, a silent testament to the price they paid for their dream of a new beginning. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. The story of the pioneers is one of incredible resilience and sacrifice, and it's a privilege to share it with you. If you found this moving or informative, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more chapters of this epic journey. We'd love to have you with us as we continue westward. See you next time. Howdy, history lovers, and welcome back to our journey along the Oregon Trail. Today, we're diving into Chapter 14, the final stretch. Our pioneers have traveled thousands of miles, faced countless hardships, and now their destination is finally within reach. But the trail has a few more challenges to throw their way before they can rest. The air is getting colder, the days are shorter, and the majestic, yet intimidating, Blue Mountains loom ahead. This is where their resolve will be tested like never before. Imagine the scene. Months on the trail have taken their toll. The pioneers are gaunt, their clothes are in tatters, and their supplies are dwindling. Every bone in their bodies aches with a fatigue that's become a constant companion. Their once sturdy wagons are now rickety and worn, wheels groaning under the strain of the rugged terrain. The oxen, their steadfast partners in this grueling trek, are just as exhausted, their ribs showing through their hides. Yet, as they crest a ridge and see the Columbia River basin stretching out before them, a new feeling begins to stir, a flicker of hope. They're almost there. The thought of a new life, a place to call home, is the fuel that keeps them moving forward, one painful step at a time. The descent from the Blue Mountains is one of the most perilous parts of the entire journey. This isn't a gentle slope. It's a series of steep, treacherous descents that test their nerves and their equipment to the absolute limit. The trails are so narrow and precipitous that they have to lock the wagon wheels, sometimes even tying large logs to the back to act as brakes, just to keep the wagons from careening out of control down the mountainside. One wrong move, one slip, could mean disaster, a lost wagon, lost supplies, or worse. The pioneers worked together, men shouting instructions, women and children walking alongside, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and concentration. The biting wind whips around them, a constant reminder that winter is closing in fast. Every morning, they wake up to a world glazed with frost. The cold seeps into their bones, making every task a struggle. Starting a fire with damp wood, preparing a meager breakfast with frozen fingers, and coaxing the exhausted livestock to their feet becomes a monumental effort. The pioneers are running on fumes. The physical exhaustion is immense, but the mental and emotional strain is just as heavy. They've buried loved ones along this trail, faced starvation, and overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Now, with the end so close, a new kind of anxiety sets in. What if they don't make it? What if, after all this, they fail at the final hurdle? This mix of deep-seated wariness and a fierce, burning determination to finish creates a powerful tension within the wagon train. They have to keep going. They simply have to. The trail along the Columbia River presents its own set of dangers. At times, the path is carved into the side of a cliff, with the roaring river hundreds of feet below. It's a dizzying, terrifying passage. Other times, they must navigate through deep, loose sand that threatens to swallow the wagon wheels whole, forcing them to double-team the oxen to pull each wagon through. The pioneers have a choice: brave this dangerous land route or build rafts and risk the treacherous rapids of the Columbia. Some choose the latter, a daunting task known as the Barlow Road, while others take their chances on the water. Both options are fraught with peril, and the decision weighs heavily on the leaders of the wagon train. It's a final, critical choice that could determine their fate, and then it happens. After weeks of battling the mountains and the cold, they round a bend, and the landscape begins to change. The rugged, rocky terrain gives way to rolling hills, and then, finally, they see it. Sprawling before them is the Willamette Valley. It's a sight more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. Lush, green, and vibrant with life. After months of seeing nothing but brown plains and gray rock, the sheer greenness of it all is overwhelming. It's a promise of fertility, a promise of a new beginning. The sight brings tears to their eyes. A wave of relief, so profound it's almost painful, washes over the weary travelers. Shouts of joy echo through the valley, replacing the grim silence of the trail. This moment is the culmination of everything they have endured. Children who have forgotten what a real home looks like stare in wonder. Men and women, hardened by the trail, let their guards down and embrace, their faces streaked with a mixture of dust and tears. They have made it. The exhaustion is still there, a deep ache in their muscles, but it's now overshadowed by an immense sense of accomplishment and hope. The valley below is not just land, it's the future. It's the dream of a farm, a home, and a life they can build with their own hands. This is the reward for their incredible courage and perseverance. They have reached their Oregon. As our pioneers begin to descend into the valley, a new energy buzzes through the group. The final miles feel different. The steps are still heavy, but their spirits are light. They start talking about the future, planning where they'll stake their claim, what crops they'll plant, and the homes they'll build. The determination that got them through the final, brutal stretch has transformed into the hopeful energy of builders and homesteaders. They have survived the Oregon Trail. Their epic journey is ending, but their new lives are just beginning. They are no longer just travelers. They are the founders of a new community, the first seeds of a new life planted in the rich soil of the West. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the final, grueling chapter of the Oregon Trail. It's a powerful story of human endurance and the unshakable hope for a better life. If you've been moved by their story, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next historical adventure. We love exploring the past with you. Until next time, stay curious. After months of relentless travel, of dust-choked trails and heart-stopping river crossings, they had finally arrived. Imagine the sight that greeted them. The Willamette Valley, a land painted in 1,000 shades of green, stretching out under a vast, welcoming sky. For the weary travelers who had stared at the monotonous brown of the plains for so long, this was more than just a destination. It was a promise fulfilled. This was Oregon. The air itself felt different here, clean, crisp, and filled with a scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the grit and grime of the trail. The exhaustion of the journey seemed to melt away, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated hope. They had made it. They were home. The first task was to claim a piece of this paradise. Men and women, their hands calloused and their faces weathered by the sun, paced out their plots of land. You could feel the energy in the air as they drove stakes into the rich, dark soil, marking the boundaries of their future. These weren't just patches of dirt. They were the foundations of dreams. With axes that had been carried for 2,000 miles, they began to clear the land. The rhythmic thud of steel on wood echoed through the valleys, a symphony of creation. Log by log, Cabin walls rose from the forest floor. Simple structures that offered shelter, warmth, and a profound sense of ownership. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just passing through. They were putting down roots. As the cabins went up, so did the farms. The very soil they stood on was a treasure. It was deep, fertile, and forgiving. Families worked together from dawn until dusk, breaking the sod, their plows pulled by the same weary oxen that had brought them across the continent. They planted seeds they had carefully protected throughout the entire journey: corn, wheat, and vegetables. Watching those first green shoots push their way through the soil was a miracle. It was a tangible sign that life would not only continue here but would flourish. Each sprout was a testament to their faith and their hard work, a promise of harvests to come and a future free from the hunger and uncertainty that had plagued them. But people need more than just food and shelter. They need each other. And so, almost as quickly as the farms took root, communities began to blossom. Neighbors, once strangers on the trail, were now bound by a shared experience that no one else could understand. They came together for barn raisings, turning a week's work for one family into a single day of collective effort and celebration. The sound of hammers was soon joined by the laughter of children. One-room schoolhouses started to appear, humble buildings where the next generation would learn to read and write, ensuring that the light of knowledge wouldn't be extinguished in the wilderness. Soon after, the simple, hand-hewn spires of churches began to punctuate the skyline. On Sundays, families would gather, their faces scrubbed clean, their clothes mended, to give thanks. These gatherings were about more than just faith. They were about connection. They were a place to share news, to offer support, to mourn losses, and to celebrate weddings. It was in these simple log churches and schoolhouses that the scattered individual homesteads began to weave themselves into the fabric of a society. They were building more than farms. They were building a civilization, piece by piece, hand in hand. Looking back from the green hills of the Willamette Valley, it's almost impossible to comprehend the journey they endured. Think of the sacrifices. They left behind homes, family, and everything they had ever known. They buried loved ones along the trail, marking their graves with simple wooden crosses or piles of stones, a heartbreaking toll for the price of a dream. They faced starvation, disease, and the constant, gnawing fear of the unknown. Every single day was a battle for survival, a test of their physical and mental fortitude. Yet, they persevered. What was it that drove them onward? It was the enduring spirit of humanity. It was the unshakable belief in a better life, not just for themselves, but for their children and their children's children. It was the courage to face down incredible odds for the chance at something more, something new, something free. The story of their journey to Oregon is more than just a chapter in a history book. It is a powerful reminder of what people are capable of when they are fueled by hope and bound together by a common purpose. The legacy of these pioneers is written all across the landscape of the West. It's in the names of the towns and rivers, in the old farmhouses that still stand against the wind, and in the spirit of the communities they founded. They were ordinary people who accomplished something truly extraordinary. They transformed a wilderness into a home. Their journey was a testament to resilience, a story of profound loss and ultimate triumph. They didn't just chase a dream. They built one with their bare hands and their unbreakable spirits, right here in the heart of Oregon. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through history. If you found this story as inspiring as we do, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. As our journey across the digital plains comes to an end, we arrive at the epilogue, not of a single story, but of a saga etched into the very soul of America, the legacy of the Oregon Trail. This wasn't just a path of dirt and rock. It was, and remains, a powerful symbol of human courage, relentless endurance, and the unyielding hope for a better life. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer audacity of it all. To pack up everything you own, to say goodbye to everything you know, and to step out into a vast, unforgiving wilderness. The families who undertook this monumental journey weren't superhuman. They were ordinary people driven by an extraordinary dream. They faced blistering heat, surprise blizzards, ragging rivers, and the constant threat of disease. Yet, they pushed forward, one foot in front of the other, their eyes fixed on a horizon that promised a new beginning. This trail became their crucible, forging in them a resilience that would become a cornerstone of the American spirit. The Oregon Trail was more than just a migration route. It was the primary artery of westward expansion in the 19th century. Between the 1840s and 1860s, an estimated 400,000 people traveled this path, a massive wave of humanity that fundamentally reshaped the American West. They weren't just moving their bodies, they were transplanting ideas, cultures, and ambitions. Small settlements blossomed into bustling towns, and eventually, great cities. The agricultural practices they brought with them turned fertile valleys into the breadbaskets of new territories. This mass movement accelerated the process of turning territories like Oregon, Washington, and Idaho into states, knitting the far-flung West into the fabric of the United States. The trail was, in essence, the blueprint for the modern American West. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Oregon Trail isn't found in maps or history books, but in the stories. These aren't just tales of hardship, they're stories of community, of strangers helping each other mend a broken wagon wheel, of sharing scarce resources, of singing songs around a campfire under a blanket of stars. They are stories of birth, of new life brought into the world amidst the greatest of uncertainties. They are stories of loss, of quiet graves marked by simple stones along the trail. A somber reminder of the price of progress. These personal histories, passed down through generations, have become our collective family album. They connect us directly to the past, allowing us to hear the creak of the wagon wheels and feel the dust on our faces. They are the human heart of this grand historical epic. So, as we reflect on this chapter of history, we see that the Oregon Trail did more than just move people from east to west. It carved a permanent path into the American memory. It stands as a testament to the idea that, with enough grit, determination, and a willingness to face the unknown, the impossible can become possible. The trail itself may have faded, overgrown by time and progress, but its spirit lives on in the stories we tell, in the landscapes it crossed, and in the adventurous heart of the nation it helped to build. It's a quiet reminder that the greatest journeys are not just about the destination, but about the profound transformation that happens along the way. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more adventures into the past. Your support means the world and helps us continue to share these important stories. Until next time, keep exploring.